it's been, I think, a week since we did one, and I did have something planned for 2 weeks ago, and I think that the theme does continue very well into this week. So I think I'm going to do that and just try to elaborate on it. I'm also going to try to cut down on the time because I really find myself trying to cut down on the time, so I'm going to try to keep it to a rather short inyan. That inyan was rather short, and even with the tie-ins, it shouldn't be overly long. So yeah, without further ado, let's jump into it. I apologize if I sound a little bit nasal. I'm coming off of a very bad cold, let's just call it that. So someone actually sent me a message last night that the fact that today's Tanya has a direct reference to Hilchos Talmud Torah is probably catnip for me. It's probably it's getting me excited, not in an addictive way. I'm assuming that's why he used the mashal of catnip, not in an addictive way, but just in a way that gets me excited. And maybe a little bit. We're going to tie into it as at the end of the shiur, but we're going to go with a little bit at the beginning of what we had towards the last couple of weeks, Tanya, and that is with a remark that is in Perek Yud. Perek Yud Aleph, I believe, that essentially we're talking about what is the Rosh Hashanah. A Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a little bit worse. Rosh Hashanah, what is a Rosh Hashanah? So we say, it's a person, not even a person that's necessarily doing Averis, right? Less than sense. You think the guy that eats Chaz on Yom Kippur, he's a Rosh Hashanah, because he's eating, at the end of the day, he's eating. There's a story, there was once a rabbi, and he went around to all of the Tefer restaurants on Yom Kippur that had Yidden eating in them in Manhattan back in the day. And he went over to each person and he said, someone asked him, why are you doing that? He said, at least they should be a moment of teyavim. And he's saying, bon appetit. At least it should be that they're enjoying. But anyhow, a Rosh Hashanah, he has his Averis, and it doesn't even need to be such bad Averis. And Alter Rebbe gives us an example. He gives a very interesting example. And I'm going to try to pick apart the niglah'dike aspect of this example a little bit. And with that, I think we'll get a little bit of an insight into a lot of the things that the Alter Rebbe seems to be framing for the Beinoni, setting it up until maybe even Parak Lamed Hey. So, the example that he gives, he says that a person doesn't become a markava for even all of the worst things. A person could even become for some small action, or he says Dibur Levad, like to talk of Akla Shinhara and Leitzanas and the like. And then he says, machshava levad, or even in thought, hirhuri avera, kashim avera, the thoughts of avera that are worse than an avera. So now, avak lashon hara, just to back up a second, avak lashon hara is the rabbanon. And the reason why I started to get into the mix is, I think maybe will come apparent in a few short moments. But for the machshava, he says, hirhuri avera, the thoughts of avera, it's worse than an avera. Even if he's not thinking about the avera, to do it. He's only thinking about the relation between a male and a female, and that's it. And to that, the Alter Rebbe says, this is the part that I want to focus on a little bit, that he's violating the prohibition of the Torah, that a person should guard themselves from every bad thing. And the Gemara says that means that a person should not think by day and thereby come to impurity by night, impurity by means of a nocturnal emission, as they say. So that is what the Alter Rebbe says. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues. He says it's a time of Shasakesha to work in Torah, that you could be learning Torah and you're not learning Torah, and that gets into another complicated conversation about is Bittul Torah, the Reis or the Rabbanon, but that's beside the point. That would be a nice thing to focus on, don't get me wrong. But this is just an interesting point, I think, that brings out the idea of a Beinoni a little bit more than just becoming another shiur in Hilchos Talmud Torah, which, Tanya could very well become. But anyhow, is seemingly a line that says, thinking about the Havira is that much more tantalizing than the actual doing the Havira. There's a lot of ways you could explain the line. And then the Alter Rebbe goes and he takes a stance, an interesting stance. I don't know if he's taking the stance, the stand with he's taking the stance to emphasize a point. And I'd like to think that the Alter Rebbe is taking the stance to emphasize the point. It's not really a proof. Really, you could walk away from the shiur, and you could walk away from the shiur with the idea that in theory you could tell that the Alter Rebbe holds like thesis. What's the thesis I'm talking about? Over there in the Gemara, if I'm remembering correctly, it's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah. But over there in the Gemara, thesis says that this drasha is not just a drasha; it's a full-on lav. It's a full-on avera. It's one of the 365 mitzvahs, say one of the 613 mitzvahs. to not have impure thoughts, to not have thoughts that tend to lead a person into having a nocturnal emission. Any thought that a person is thinking that you think, it's going to lead them into nocturnal emission, that is a thought that a person is not allowed to have, according to thesis and Deraisa. Now, the Gemara over there actually gives a whole list of things that are included in this idea, and you could find maybe the Gemara is giving a concrete list, a Kabbalah, for Moshe Rabbeinu. You could find that the Gemara is giving only suggestions, or you could find that the Gemara is giving, very well-educated ideas. There's a lot of ways that you could take the Gemara. You could also take this understanding of thesis to mean that it's dafka if there's a shiur, that the shiur of this avera is that you shouldn't come to Tumah by night. The Shemar called Avera is saying, it's not that the thought itself is bad, and you can say Chatzi shiur is also nice, so you can say that. Really, the essence of the avera is only violated when you come to actually having a nocturnal emission at night. You could say that that's what it is. It's a hard call to make, and I'm not really here to focus on the halachic aspect of this, because when you look at other poskim, it seems to be that people aren't 100% fond of this idea of calling it Deraisa. Now, I'm going to say really that I'm going from memory over here. I don't have notes. I did plan on giving this share in theory last week. I wasn't able to make notes. I did get a little bit sick. But Tachlis Geret is, I'll go a little bit off of memory. If I'm remembering correctly, in Hilchas Nairo, the Alter Rebbe, not the Alter Rebbe, the Rambam. As far as I don't know, we don't have a Hilchas Nairo from the Alter Rebbe. But in Hilchas Nairo, there is a discussion, and the discussion really comes up in the Gemara, which is, what is the reason why a Mesi Shemra is Asur? Why you're not allowed to go to court with two witnesses and say, hey, these two witnesses are testifying that my wife slept with someone else before we consummated our marriage, which is essentially the whole idea of a Nair Meir Asa. Or I should say a Mesi Shemra, that a person is accusing his wife of essentially cheating and breaking the engagement in a very promiscuous way. So what's that vera? Maybe that the Eidim, they're testifying falsely, we got that. That's you're not allowed to bear false testimony. But what's the problem with the husband bringing these witnesses? And the reason why we need to ask what's the problem with the husband bringing these witnesses is because there is a punishment that's outlined. The punishment that's outlined is that Sai gets patch, Sai gets malchus, and it also has to pay a monetary fine. So we're interested in knowing what is it in the Torah that prohibits him, that warns him, you're not allowed to do this. We always say that we know where the Torah says the punishment. How do we know that he's warned? And so to this, the Gemara puts forward two ideas. One idea is that it says in the pasuk, you're not allowed to be a talebearer. Okay, this guy's also a talebearer. He's coming. He's spreading this idea that his wife was promiscuous, probably soon to be his ex-wife after they put her to death. So he's spreading tales about his wife. There's another thing, which is that you should guard yourself from every bad thing. Now what's this every bad thing? This every bad thing we're going to say is referring to this, specifically to this. Now it gets a little bit interesting because you could taina maybe that Minishmarta would apply to more than one thing. In theory, you could taina. It's a little bit hard to say that in this case, not 100% hard to say. You can still make the argument, but in general, we try to say that alav shevachalos, you don't get punishment for, you don't get malchus for, and you could explain that Mesi Shemra is specific. The Torah singles it out. It's Yitzim and Aklal in other ways. It is the only avera really that a person is able to accrue both monetary and corporeal punishment. So it's unique in some respects, but it would be an interesting claim to make that when it's called avera is referring to a whole array of things, and it does happen to be that for impure thoughts you also violate a lav when the lav is referring to something more along the lines of lashon hara. The Rambam in his Hilchos Naira, going back to the Rambam uses the pasuk "Oh, and if I'm not mistaken, over there the Kesef Mishnah says that the Rambam quotes the pasuk of Leisei Lechrachel. For what reason? Why doesn't he choose the pasuk of Nishmat Kol Dera? He says because it's meforish, because it's straightforward. Leisei Lechrachel, saying don't bear tails. This guy is bearing tails, so that's what the Rambam prefers it. So now a lot of Achareinim discuss this Kesef Mishnah because on the one hand you could have said, well, what's the reason why the Rambam doesn't use the pasuk of Nishmat Kol Dera? Because he holds like thesis, he holds the Tzir. It's a little bit hard to claim that though, because the Rambam Tachlis Gret doesn't actually bring in his, you expect in Hilchos Rebbe or something like that to have a law like this. The Rambam has a whole chapter, chapter 21 if I'm not mistaken, about, not a whole chapter per se, You have a lot of ideas about Zera Lavatala and things like that Rambam brings. In his Hilchos Deis, he brings in matters about health about Zera Lavatala, and you think that the Rambam would be bringing that. Oh, and it's also nice to say the Rambam also has a count of mitzvahs. He's not counting which ones we call the Verah, and saying that you're not allowed to be Bahar Bayim. So it's interesting that the Kesef Mishnah takes this route, and you would say that the most straightforward way I would put forward that the most straightforward way to understand the Kesef Mishnah is that he's saying Yitaka might have wondered, you might have wondered about this. It's a specific kind of rechilos. The fact that you have this punishment usually for lashon hara, you don't get any punishment over here. The Torah does decide to give him punishment. Sai is only talking; he's not doing a ma'isa. Sai, he's not even really doing anything; he's just bringing forward the witnesses. And Sai gets a double punishment, both money and the petch. But at the end of the day, the Kesef Mishnah says that the warning is from, let's say, the Krochel, and it's just more straightforward. It's more straightforward, and that's what the Kesef Mishnah is saying. So it seems to be that we hold that the Rambam does not hold that Nishmar to be called a Verah is a lav d'oraisa. Now, I should mention, firstly, it kind of goes without saying, but it's still good to say that you do have many mitzvahs that are bali thesis. Like, for example, the Smak, who, if I'm not mistaken, explicitly has a lav of thinking about women in this way. And I think the Smak mentions it, but doesn't have a specific lav for it. It's part of just a general thing. But again, this goes with the fact that they are bali tesis, The Beisesif in Even Ezer and Simon Chafalef. It's funny that it works out to be Chafalef and Chafalef by both the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch. It doesn't always line up that way. Usually Shulchan Aruch has simonim that go into way higher numbers than the Rambam has for Prakim, but I digress. The Beisesif over there quotes Rabbeinu Yonah, and in Rabbeinu Yonah brings out that it's actually funny. It turns out that thinking about a woman who is single is worse than touching her. Why? Because by the time that you cross all the I's, by the time that you dot all the I's and cross all the T's, it turns out that touching a priya is seemingly definitely not also d'oraisa. What's the law? What's the law with the priya? You're able to marry her. She's not also to you in any way, shape, or form. To sleep with her, technically speaking, would be okay. Fine. The fact that she's a nida is a technicality. It's not to say, not to comment on the idea that touching a nida. There's a Gemara Masechet Shabbos about it, and it's either d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan to negia with a nida. But at the end of the day, imagine you have a priya and she went to the mikvah, right? Touching this woman, she's a priya. Her essence is what we're talking about, not the fact that she happens to be a nida or not, which is a secondary thing. It's not part of the essence of who she is, that she's a nida. So a priya in and of herself, the problem of a zayna, maybe depending on who you ask, but seemingly the same. We say that the whole idea of the sermons of the Isser of Nigia is only for Arayis, for maybe also you're including a Nida, but seemingly only for Karis and up. For a Lav, seemingly there is no problem. However, when it comes to here, it says Rabbeinu Yonah, it's also d'oraisa. And it's because of Nishmar to be called the Verah. So you have this mention of Rabbeinu Yonah in the Beisesif. It's coming in the context of other things, and the point still stands. Whether it's d'oraisa or d'Rabbanan, at the end of the day, we don't know of any Isser of touching a Pruya that, in theory, has gone to mikvah. However, to think about a Pruya in that sense is problematic. Now, there does happen to be divrei Kabbalah about this, which is part of the idea of why it's a little bit challenging, not 100% challenging, but a little bit challenging to accept the idea that it's d'oraisa. Obviously, every idea over here that we might express against something will always have a pircha. The Balei Tesis knew everything that was flying in the Gemara. But you have a divrei Kabbalah about it, which is that in Eve it says, Bris karati le'enai u'mas bainin al besula. I have a covenant with my eyes, and for what shall I ponder upon a virgin? Says Eve. So from here, we basically say that you are not allowed to think about a woman. However, there is an exception to the rule, which is kind of cut into this idea. It's sort of implied in the pasuk. It's not 100% implied, but sort of, that you are able to think about a woman for the sake of getting married. You want to know if you will find her attractive. So you're allowed to think about her in that way. Now, there's a lot of back and forth about if it's the proper thing for a Talmud Chacham to do or not. There's a good back and forth between the Rambam and the Ravid. Maybe a Talmud Chacham is not supposed to think about it, supposed to ask his friends to think about it, his less scrupulous than himself friends, I suppose, to think about the woman if she would be proper. There's a whole thing about Avram Avinu, and maybe that's why he didn't know the Sarah was beautiful, but that's all a very interesting share about the topic. Right now, again, we're focusing on really what is Beinoni, and essentially what's the licensure for a Beinoni, like what is it that makes you Beinoni, and then technically speaking we're talking about a Rosh Hashanah, but it's all going to flow into how to try to be the best Yidden that we can, and for most of us that happens to be a Beinoni. So we're going to digress from that subject. It's very good. And then you have the Kabbalah that implies that you are not allowed to be thinking about women. Now, you could always say firstly, the Kabbalah is coming to echo something that's written in the Torah. You have that idea all the time. Just because it says that you're not allowed to serve Avodah Zarah in Nevi'im doesn't mean that it's not a Dereisa. But that being said, it is always passed off as being the Kabbalah. And there's a lot of ways to kind of talk about this, and I think that one way to talk about, once we're mentioning the Beis Yosef, is that the Beis Yosef is talking about a lot of ideas of histaklus, which is to gaze. Now, to gaze is seemingly different from looking. Now, the Alter Rebbe, in his Chaim, in Simin Ayin Hey, if I'm not mistaken, he has over there a couple of Kundus, and essentially what it says over there is that while there are opinions that say that histaklus could be just a mere glance, in theory, but the Gemara seem to imply, and if I'm not mistaken, he actually counts the Beis Yosef as being one of the opinions that says that this is what it is, that histaklus is more than just looking. It's looking with intent. It's looking with intention. That you're thinking about what you're looking at. So to see something in passing is not histaklus. It's only to actually gaze at it. And this is how the Alter Rebbe paskins, unless you can get away without it. That is to say, essentially, imagine you're standing on the street in New York, and you're in Manhattan. You're running to a meeting, and then mitzvah you remember, I need to say Kriya Shema. Now, all around you, there are almost certainly women that are not dressed 100% seriously. It's almost a matter of fact. How is it mutter to live in New York? Good question. Ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Maybe it's not mutter to live in New York. But I digress. Ultimately, you got to say Kriya Shema. So now, in theory, if there were a woman and she was making it impossible for you to look away or think about something else standing right in front of you, it's an oinus. You can't say Kriya Shema. You're not allowed to say Kriya Shema. Especially so if it's mamish and erva. In that case, it's pasha. It's a lav deiraisa, as it is if it's only like a tefach b'isha and stuff like that. Then it's a lav derabanan. Complicated, not getting into that dafka over here. But at the end of the day, you're still not allowed to. It's an oinus, and Chacham, in the same way that Chacham gave us the impetus to do mitzvahs aseh, there's a whole thing about it in Simon Kuf Chof Ches. Ultimately, the Chacham can say shei b'al taseh, don't do the mitzvahs aseh when we're telling you to stand back. So at the end of the day, the rest of Rabbanon, you're not allowed to say Kriya Shema in that instance. You're not allowed to do it. But if you hold like this idea of the Alter Rebbe, then when you're walking down the street, stop, and there's an unmarried woman and their hair is uncovered, not to get into if Goyish women need to cover their hair, not to say do they have an obligation to, but are we obligated to consider their hair to be an erva? That's beside the point. You have short sleeves and short pants or skirts or whatever it is, and at the end of the day, you're allowed to say Kriya Shema over there. Why? Because you are covering your eyes, you're not looking at them, you're certainly not gazing at them. Either right in front of you, okay, you're not gazing at them. That is Alter Pashas that did, says the Alter Rebbe. And it's explained as Kundesachrin, there's a Gemara, Brachis, etc., etc. So in this conversation about histaklus, when you take that stance that histaklus is taka gazing, then it means that gazing is actually stronger than hirur, it would seem, because hirur is thinking. What hirur? How you exactly translate hirur? I'm not a linguist. But hirur is to some extent thinking, and histaklus is going to have some extra level. Now you can tell that hirur is really just a light level of thinking, a small thought, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, histaklus is not just looking. It's not just something that could pass in front of your eyes. It needs to be that there's some kind of intent behind it. So that's the idea. Ultimately, this Beis Yosef, the idea that's brought out, doesn't really go anywhere in Shulchan Aruch. Including Rabbeinu Yonah, it's an important point to be brought out that at the end of the day, it is also to think about a priya, and that point stands regardless of if it's the Reis or Rabbanon. Is this point brought in Shulchan Aruch? Not that I'm aware of. Not in Simcha Chafalaf at least. So this is the general point, which is that when it comes down to it, it seems to be that classical poskim like the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch don't hold it to be deraisa. However, the Alter Rebbe does say that it's deraisa. So now that we've arrived here, I want to focus on maybe a little bit why. Now you could say the Alter Rebbe, free thinker, makes his own psakim. If anyone wants to approach me on the street, I could talk for hours and hours and hours about the Alter Rebbe's psak being influenced by the thesis in a more independent way. But all of that is beside the point. You could take it. Alter Rebbe is just simply choosing thesis, and he's passing like thesis. And I think I mentioned before, you could walk away from this with that in theory. I think there's a more interesting angle to explore as a possibility for why the Alter Rebbe might have chosen to take just in passing the mention of the idea that it's deraisa. Now, it should also be mentioned, Machal is an idea that just because something in the Gemara says deraisa doesn't necessarily mean that it's counted as one of the 613 mitzvahs. It just means that there's an impetus from Torah. B'chlal, you have ideas like eating on Shabbos is from, we learn from the Mon. The Mon was not in Hemes L'Deres, therefore the Mon doesn't count it as a mitzvah, but it's still deraisa. You have that idea over there. You could kind of that this idea of her that's maybe to Tuma is something that would only apply with Tuma and Tara. Maybe in theory you could argue. You could also have the idea that something that is mentioned in Torah it implies to you that there's something over there, but it's still not Hashem saying that you should do something or that you shouldn't do something. You have the idea, for example, according to those that hold the sheitel is derabanan, that is to say that hair covering is derabanan, for any not Lubavitcher listeners out there. You have the idea that it says that how do you know that a woman covering her hair is deraisa? You have the Brayetha of Rabbi Shmuel, if I'm not mistaken, and over there we say because it says that the kohen undoes the hair of a seita, which implies that the hair is supposed to be covered. Now, is this in any way saying that the hair needs to be covered? It's not. It's just saying the hair is covered. So you see the impetus from the Torah that the hair is supposed to be covered. You have Mayhar Habasulis. The amount of money that a woman, a virgin woman, particularly gets when she gets married is this deraisa d'Rabbanan. We hold l'maisa that it is d'Rabbanan, and I'm saying it's machlokes the Tanoim. This is how we pass with them. It's d'Rabbanan. You have yichud. According to the people that say that yichud is d'Rabbanan. A lot of these things are going to have a machlokes on one side to the other. Is it going to be deraisa d'Rabbanan? And really, it's kind of the nature of this whole conversation. If no one is coming out and saying that it's deraisa, then how would you ever have the inkling to say that anyone's going to say that it's that anyone that would say that it's deraisa? That is to say, let's say you have halacha. If you don't have anyone mentioning the idea that it should be deraisa, it wouldn't come up in the conversation of things that are said to be deraisa but are derabanan. And if it is deraisa taka, then again it's not going to come up in the conversation of things that are said to be deraisa but would be derabanan. You need to have two sides to the story. But a lot of sides to the story we're going to hold l'maisa like Mayar B'Solis, or some maybe in Yichud according to who you hold like. And a lot of the sheitel according to you hold like. And a lot of these things, there's very legitimate opinions, very legitimate upstanding opinions that things that it says in the Gemara are deraisa are actually derabanan. So you could kind of Alter Rebbe when he's saying deraisa over here that's what he's referring to. But I think we could take it just for the intellectual exercise to say that Alter Rebbe is saying that it is deraisa. And I think there's a particular point to be brought out with the Alter Rebbe mentioning that it is deraisa. And that is because we could contrast it with what it says in Parak Yud Beis. What does it say in Parak Yud Beis? It says shortly after that we're talking about a Beinoni. Parak Yud Aleph is about the Rosh Hashanah, a little bit about the Rosh Hashanah, if I'm remembering correctly. But for the Beinoni in Parak Yud Beis, we say that a Beinoni doesn't do anything. And we say that the Yetzer Hara, he's talking there and he's kicking and he's fighting. But the Beinoni doesn't do anything. And we say that Beinoni, he davens, and over there he's talking, he has reprieve. Not sure, I went to the Torah. But he has some kind of release from the hold of his Nefesh Bahamas. But then, after he's done, it goes back as though he never davened at all. What is it that makes a Beinoni? Isur He does not actually do anything bad. It doesn't go. It never rises in his mind that he should do an avera. What is it? What is it that rises in his mind? It's the thoughts of an avera that's worse than an avera. These are able to rise up to the Beinoni's mind and to confuse them from Torah and divine service. And as our sages tell us, that there are three averos that a person is not safe from them every day, and they are shiur avera, iyun tefillah, and the third one is v'ach lashon hara. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of the shiur that in Parak Yud there's a reference to v'ach lashon hara, and I think I said that we're going to get to that in a few moments, and this is a few moments. So it seems to be that the Alter Rebbe is saying that a Beinoni also has a shiur avera, and this is a mindful concept because we said about the other guy, we said about the Rosh of he has shiur avera, he makes him a Rasha, and about the Beinoni we're saying, we can look forward and we can keep on saying that ultimately the Beinoni isn't being makabel this shiur, and you would say that that's really the difference. The Rosh of he's thinking about the shiur, he's enjoying it, it's kishmak for him. The Beinoni, he doesn't think about the shiur, but then what's interesting, and this is, I think, really a point to be brought out, why the Alter Rebbe might have mentioned the idea of it being deraisa to be able to bring out this point in a more subtle way. In theory, completely in theory, it's only me positing. I would posit the idea is true regardless of whether or not this was the Alter Rebbe's intention, but still the idea that this might have been what the Alter Rebbe's intention was is very theoretical. But I digress. What the Alter Rebbe says is that he's not accepting it with his desire, chas v'shalom. But when this shiur comes up, immediately when it arises in his thought, he pushes it away with two hands. He pushes it away immediately when he remembers that it is a bad thought. He's not accepting it with his will, even to think about it with his will. How much more so to raise it into his mind to even do a chas v'shalom, or even to speak about it. And he says because a person that thinks about it with desire is called a rasha in that moment. With desire. And a Beinoni is not a rasha even for one moment. This is what the Alter Rebbe says. So, what I think is trying to be brought out is like this. There is an interesting Gemara in Maseches Menachos. The conversation is part of a larger conversation about a kohen that serves Avodah Zarah, that his avodah to Avodah Zarah causes that he is disqualified from working in the Beis HaMikdash. So now, you have machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. And the machlokes is like this, that it says, if a person was intentionally shechted a carbon for Avodah Zarah, Rav Nachman says that his carbon is reach niglah'dike. And the conversation, there's a lot to be said. I'll get to it shortly. I'll explain the machlokes because I don't want to be leaving anyone in the dark. Dafka. And Rav Sheshes says that the carbon is not a reach niglah'dike. Rav Nachman says that the carbon is a reach niglah'dike. He says because when he shechted, it's not sheros. Because shechita is not something that specifically a kohen needs to do in the Beis HaMikdash. Even a zar, even a non-kohen, is able to shecht a carbon for the Beis HaMikdash. It's only from receiving the blood and onward that it's a mitzvah for the kohen. Rav Sheshes says the carbon is not a reach niglah'dike because at the end of the day, when he shechts for Avodah Zarah, he becomes like a kohen for Avodah Zarah. A kamer for Avodah Zarah is the word. He became a servant for the Avodah Zarah. Rav Nachman says, I have a brisa. The brisa is going to knock you out of the park, Rav Sheshes, because it says, kohen she'avad Avodah Zarah v'shav carbon reach niglah'dike. Kohen served Avodah Zarah and he did tshuva, then his carbon is a reach niglah'dike. So Rav Nachman says, let's think about it. Because remember, the conversation is about someone that does it b'mezid, right? That's the machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes. He says, if it's a shegeg, what does it mean when it says v'shav? He says, shav imintu. He is standing in shuvah. He did it b'shegeg. He's standing in shuvah. You can't tell me that a kohen that serves with Zarah b'shegeg is ever going to be considered that he did it, that he's now kohen for Avodah Zarah. He didn't know what he was doing. He is standing in shuvah. He's standing in shuvah. That's the line that I'm going to emphasize. I'll just finish off with the Gemara. Rav Nachman says that it must be b'mezid, and if it's b'zika, then what difference does it make if the person taka did tshuva, and then he did the avodah? So it says at the end of the day it must be referring to shechita. Rav Sheshes says actually it is referring to a shegeg. And I just want to bring out this point because I think that Rav Sheshes' point is equally as important for the point that I'm going to be trying to bring out. Rav Sheshes says that actually the brisa is talking about a case of shegeg, and this is what the brisa is saying, that if the person immediately when they chapsich they say oivei does tshuva from the beginning, it shows that the entire idea of what he was doing was a shegeg, and therefore his carbon is a reach niglah'dike. If not, his carbon is not a reach niglah'dike. What's the idea of shav ve'emin? So it seems to be that Shav V'Emin is Pasha saying that in the place that the person is standing, they are standing in a consistent state of tshuva. They don't know about the Avera yet. But from where they are standing, it is as though they are standing in a place of tshuva. Now, Rav Nachman takes this to an extreme. He says that the fact that it's a shegig means that automatically it's considered tshuva. Rav Sheshes says, not so fast. If when he finds out about it, you can see that he's standing in a state of tshuva, then it is considered tshuva. If not, then not. But at the end of the day, you see that if you have a person, and the second they find out about it, they double back and they say, whoa, not my Avera. It shows that they're considering themselves, they're standing in a place of tshuva. They're standing in tshuva. The entire time from beginning to end, it's not like they did a moment of Avera and then the tshuva. From the moment that they did the Avera, every slice that knife was taking, it's with tshuva. They're standing in tshuva constantly. So going back to the point of the Alter Rebbe, the point in Tanya, I think that you could bring out a beautiful verse with this in the Alter Rebbe's understanding, and this understanding I would demonstrate it in the next few chapters for a few minutes. Again, I'm trying to keep it to a little bit of a shorter format. The Alter Rebbe seems to be saying like this: you could have someone and they have hirurim, they have hirur avera. What matters is not they have the hirur avera. And taken, you might say, okay, well, the reason why it's not such a problem is because it's only the Rabbanon. The Alter Rebbe says no, even if hirur avera are deraisa, and it's something involuntary, and it's something that comes up in the person's mind, and no, the person is probably enjoying it because they're human, they're basar v'dam, and that's why their brain makes them think about such things. Doesn't matter. Shav v'emin to. And the difference between a Beinoni and Rosh V'Tovlei is the Rosh V'Tovlei, he's thinking about it, and that's him, he likes thinking about it. The Beinoni, the moment that he chapsich, it doesn't matter if he's thinking about it even for a while. That's why the Alter doesn't say, it comes up and he pushes it away. He says, the point is, Ein Mekabli B'Ratzin. I mean, he does say miyad miyad l'sham nechir b'shtei yadayim b'siach taitei, but then Alter Rebbe emphasizes miyad shenizkar shu'ir ra. It's what's the miyad? Miyad is when he recognizes that it's a hirara. You could technically try to make a sterilisha seifa of. First he says immediately when it comes up, and then he says immediately when he remembers that it's a bad hero. But I think that the Alter Rebbe is just saying this is the explanation of miyad. Miyad doesn't mean immediately when the thought comes passion. It means immediately when it comes up that the thought is taka thought of Avera. When it comes up that the thought is a thought of Avera, that is when he pushes it away immediately. Because he does not want to have anything to do with this. And so Sai according to Rav Nachman, Sai according to Rav Sheshes, Sishav even to it was not his intention. And this idea applies. Thought is the most finicky and tricky thing to control. I would say. Having experience as a human being, I would say that thought is probably one of the trickier things to control. But this is what it is. Even a thought that comes into the head, and it's a thought, it's on a niglah'dike level. I think that's ultimately, possibly what the Alter Rebbe is trying to bring out. Now, maybe the Alter Rebbe taka hold that Vinishmarta is a lav deraisa. You can say it's 1 on 613, etc., etc. I'm not convinced about that idea. I do think the Alter Rebbe wouldn't be going against the tide of the Rambam on this one. But at the end of the day, Hirurim, their problem is immediately, their problem is B'chal, but the thing that decides between a Beinoni and a Rosh V'Tovlei is the moment after realizing. And it's not just that, it's because he's doing the best that he can. It's that, you could say that that's because he's doing the best that he can. But in the nature of a Beinoni, that is what he is. He's Shav V'Emin. When the moment that he knows that he's doing an Avera, he wants out. It's not that it's not an Avera. And it only becomes an Avera when you think about it. You could tie that also. But it doesn't matter what's happening. What matters is that the Beinoni is ultimately just trying to do his best. Now, what's the reason why I think it's important to bring this out? Because I think that there are other points that the Alter Rebbe continues going about the nature of klippa, and not just other things. Keep going, but these are themes discussed throughout Tanya. The idea that when a person eats something that is teif, let's say for example, it becomes a mavasar kivsare, and he's not able to elevate it. It doesn't make a person is Beinoni if they eat teif accidentally. I would taina not. I would taina that the point of the Beinoni is in their intention. The point of the Beinoni is it's not about are they living in sin, are they doing an avera. The point of the Beinoni is that the moment that they find out, they're going to try to rectify it as much as possible. By the way, Tshuva Me'avel could in theory turn over the teif even. But even assuming that doesn't happen, it doesn't make them is Beinoni. And I think that really it's not just about the technicalities, it's not just about, different points. I think that ultimately what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say, what he's trying to bring out from here and now until the Parak Lamed Hey, is the point that a Beinoni is still a person. They're still a human being. And Be'ez Hashem, we're going to give a share at some point in the future about what exactly a Beinoni is. I think I might have doubled down with shiur and plan for Parak Test, but whatever, that's a problem for future me. Ultimately, a Beinoni is a real person, and they're not always perfect. They're not always doing the absolute best that they can. And I think that to illustrate this point, I mean, firstly, you have Parak Gimel about Zevaz Sheftim, etc., etc. And also the point that a Beinoni is the everyman's level of Avodah. But ultimately, I think it brings us to the point that I mentioned at the beginning that someone said must be catnip for me. I think it's a good point to be brought out, which is the difference between a tzaddik, or not a tzaddik, I mean, you have a tzaddik and a rasha, and asher lo yavadeh. What's the difference between someone that serves Hashem and someone that does not serve Hashem? The difference is, seemingly, one time of chazara, which sounds a little bit funny in today's day and age where people are not wont to doing chazara as much as they used to in the past. Definitely not to the extent that they used to do it in the past where they didn't really have things written down and you had to commit everything to memory, or maybe you had some vague notes, but you had to make sure that you had a really good handle on it, or, I guess in theory, a lot of paper to write down and a very good handwriting. But most people, they sat and they reviewed 100 times over everything. The niglah'dike, and this isn't the Alter Rebbe's vart, this is the Gemara's vart. An niglah'dike is a person that goes one extra time in their chazara. Most people are doing it 100, they're doing it 101. And it's not just that they got used to doing 101, it's that they're pushing themselves beyond what they normally do. They're pushing their boundaries. This is what makes an niglah'dike. Is this what makes a Beinoni? No, this does not make a Beinoni. And the Alter Rebbe says that a Beinoni has these two levels also. A Beinoni also has pushing themselves. A Beinoni is not about how hard they are, how much they break themselves, the skafia that they have, etc. A Beinoni is simply about this, that where they stand, they do not want to do an avera. As the Alter Rebbe said, that a person doesn't want to be separated from Hashem, even for 1 second. He doesn't want to be like the other guy, etc., etc. So I think this is a point, and the Alter Rebbe goes on a lot of tangents over here to explain and to bring out this point that a Beinoni is someone, he has flaws like the rest of us. He has machshavas zaros, and he thinks about machshavas zaros and he likes them. The difference between a Beinoni, and this is, I think, the summary of the entire share. The difference between a Beinoni and a rasha v'tevlei is that the Beinoni, after chapping this, after having machshavas zara, the geshmaka, enticing, etc., machshavas zara, the difference is that a Beinoni, once they chapzich, they push it away. Once they chapzich that it's an avera and that it's separating them from Hashem, they don't want to have any part of that. They're shavu imid. They get up and they're done with it. Rasha v'tevlei, same thought, same avera. The Beinoni, technically speaking, is being over an avera the same way. You can't say that because it was an inus in here, it's an avera b'inus. I mean, that gets into a whole other conversation that an avera b'inus is still an avera, and. I just am trying to keep it in short format, and I didn't have to prepare to talk about that point. But you could take it that at least as an idea that an avera b'inus is still an avera. It just happens to be b'inus, so you don't punish the person, but it's still considered an avera. But notwithstanding the point that an avera is committed by a Beinoni, it could be that he is treif and he's not aware of it. At the end of the day, the point is that a Beinoni, the moment that they find out, they want out completely. Rasha v'tevlei, not so, but Rasha v'tevlei can get there. We all can get there. And okay, shortened it a little bit. Not too bad.